Tom Brady, you get who you want.
No, when she broke up with him and left for the Juice guy, he's like, yeah, okay. Well, I guess I gotta get this gold dick out now.
I mean, if you're into the GOAT, I'm 6'5", whatever you want.
6'5"?
Probably. Tall man. Great athlete. Greatest quarterback maybe ever. I mean,
Yeah, might as well be 6'5".
Sure. Big fella. But also, like, it's just so much more than that. He's such a special...
And life doesn't suck for that guy. Or it's like, okay, yeah, the jiu-jitsu instructor we brought on to train my kids? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna go fuck whoever I want and keep drinking these avocado shakes.
That's it. Homeboy got muscular. I don't believe that picture, but...
Yeah, that picture's all kinds of weird.
Test.
Wow. Yeah, he did play for a long fucking time. A long time. Thank God.
All right, Chin, is that it, Bubba? That's it. All right, B, you're in Dallas, my boy from East Dallas Diesel.
Let's go, baby. Hyenas.
Fernando, they're going
Friday, Saturday. 2 shows Friday, 2 shows Saturday. I'll see y'all there.
All right, kids, that's it. Go watch Nick Simmons' new YouTube show. What is it? No Leg Days.
No.
Drops today, Thursday.
Oh, today?
Yep.
All right, there you go.
Drops today. Go watch it. No Leg Days on YouTube.
Drops today.
It's awesome. They got some great guests. Your boy's the first guest, but it's a damn good show. All right, kids. This is Fun Kid. We're out.
Got to the city like Fred and Sean. Just the worst podcast ever. The worst podcast ever. Back to the city like Fred and Sean.
He says he has directed Rubio and Vice President Vance, together with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, work with Israel and Lebanon to achieve lasting peace. U.S. Central Command says 13 ships with ties to Iran have been forced to turn around in the Strait of Hormuz because of the U.S. blockade. ABC's Christian Cordero says another 10,000 U.S. troops are expected to arrive in the Middle East by the end of the month. News brought to you by Thorson Motor Center. Billionaire climate activist and progressive Democrat Tom Steyer has announced his plan to plant channeling agents in some cases. Steyer says Democrats need to stop more than simply engage in rhetoric if they're going to stand up to Trump's new administration. Steyer's 5-point plan also includes stronger legislation to combat racial profiling and a No Gay Rights Public Awareness campaign. He's also promised to get people home who've been detained by ICE, which he calls a violent abuse. California big donors have started funneling their money toward San Jose Mayor Bob Megan. Right after disgraced former Congressman Eric Swalwell got out of the governor's race amid multiple sexual assault allegations, billionaires started writing checks to Mayhem. The candidate received $1 million each from an NY's co-founder, a partner from a Northern California investment firm, as well as former candidate for Los Angeles Mayor.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Production called Machuto Leilambed.
One of the hardest state divisions is Bobble Studios, where much of the visual development team, the artists behind the look of blockbuster films, has been let go. Cuts come as Marvel scales back production and Disney continues broader cost-cutting efforts. Heather KFI News. Police in Virginia say the state's former lieutenant governor has shot and killed his wife and then himself. Fairfax County Police Chief Kevin Davis says Justin Fairfax and his wife, Karina, Serena, were found dead in her home after midnight when their teenage son called 911. Fairfax served as lieutenant governor from 2018 to 2022. He was a rising star in the Democratic Party before his career was derailed by sexual assault allegations in 2019. Tesla is investigating a claim of a driver in Texas who says his car's autopilot kicked in while he was sitting in a railroad crossing. Dallas area transit crossing last week. His car suddenly accelerated. Railroad barrier and shot across the tracks just ahead of the train. Wow, it's not her. Michael Castle, KFI News. Southland weather, KFI. Lots of sunshine on the way for this afternoon. Highs in the upper 60s at the coast. Low to mid 70s for Metro LA, Inland DC, and the valleys. Low to upper 70s in the Inland Empire. 60s for the Antelope Valley. You see some gusty winds too, gusting to about 40 miles per hour. Overnight lows in the 40s and 50s, and then warming up tomorrow and Saturday with highs in the 70s to mid 80s. Windy with gusts to about 45 miles per hour in the valleys and 80. And then we'll start cooling down on Sunday. It's 60 in Midland Beach, 58 in Lake Forest, 60 in Cerritos, 61 in Costa Mesa. by Supersure. Supersure.com. One super agency, one powerful platform. All your business insurance in one place. The Dow is trading up 105 points. The Nasdaq is up 110. And the S&P 500 is up 24. The scratching industry up 60.
63 westbound, big mess there, right past, right around 7th Avenue. Crash on the right shoulder. This lane stretching all the way back to the bow. Well, it is just an active on the westbound side. It is quite slow as well. Montello, we've got problems there on the 63 westbound and Atlantic. That looks like an injury crash. So that's got to be slow approachment to that stretch. So no fun there. We've got issues as well on the 10 freeway in the Upland, Ontario area, westbound 10, just past the people live there. So a vehicle crash, the center divider. We have brakes from that little mix up back from the side of Even Avenue on the westbound side. This will crash 105 westbound, Wilmington Avenue, that's on the right shoulder. And in Linwood, 105 westbound, East Long Beach Boulevard. That is a crash on the right shoulder as well. Car versus the semi. With Southern California's most active traffic, inside the full traffic. 2%. That's the number of people who take the stairs or has to have my voice turned twice away on my podcast. 2%. Giving practical advice to look at why you don't ask me and yourself through some hardships, and you will come out on the other side made happier, more fulfilled, healthier person. Listen to 2% on America's #1 podcast network, iHeart. For free iHeart app, search 2%. That's TWO% to start listening.
The free iHeartRadio app is #1 for music, radio, and podcasts all in one. Discover a new podcast from our library of hundreds of thousands of titles. Here's an iHeartRadio podcast preview.
The local sheriff used their baby said one killer. It's been 4 days since those bodies were found, and there's no arrest as of this morning.
They were afraid to fish down in there.
An Ohio family in a pre-planned execution.
There's right before the shock of the country. It's fatality. And it's mystery. It's a trouble crimes. And why? The family was targeted. Most of them targeted while they were sleeping. However, that kept the family. Well, they would do nothing. They would be they have secrets that could lead someone to be dead. The innocent victims or something in between. Ultimately, this is a story about family and loss and hope for redemption.
The iHeartRadio app, #1 for music, radio, and podcasts, all in one app. Are we going to talk at all about the dead? That's right. Carried away.
The what? We're going to talk about the what?
The dead Rabbi Venus.
Kennedys.
Rejecting
The
factor.
dead
I
Rabbi
say,
Venus. How does this not interrupt you, Big Mark? Do I just stop?
How is this not? No, it's different. If I interrupt you, that doesn't count. I assume based on what we are.
Yeah, that doesn't count. Did I interrupt you?
It lasted 90 seconds.
I was just gonna ask, how does it work in terms of I just wait for you to stop talking, right?
It's so funny that you don't know how it works. There is breaking news, which we will get to a little bit more. President Trump, just a short time ago, said that he has now sold his 10th. He just had a social post. I had excellent conversations with the highly respected President Joseph Al-Nouri of Lebanon and Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu of Israel. These two leaders have agreed that in order to achieve peace between their countries, they will formally begin a 10
day ceasefire at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. On Tuesday, on Tuesday, the two countries met for the first time in 34 years here in D.C. But right, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, I corrected, Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Rubio, together with the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Dan Racine Kane, to work with Israel and Lebanon to achieve lasting peace. It has been my honor to solve 9 wars across the world, and this will be my 10th. So let's get it done. Signed, President
Circling back to the dead raccoon penis, it's in the new biography, RFK Jr., Fall and Rise. There's a bunch of RFK Jr. anecdotes coming out this week. There's a big spread in People magazine about his deceased wife killed herself, hung herself. The day after, I think he asked for a divorce. That marriage had already been done, but anyway, that was the timing of it. So there's all this personal life stuff that's coming out of RFK Jr. It's not good. It's all awful, salacious. He's a womanizer, old man, cheating, blah, 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 blah.
history of drug use early on, too.
Yeah, but the one that just came out this week is that he admits in his biography when he stumbled on a dead squirrel, he chopped off the animal's penis because he wanted to study it later on. A raccoon, excuse me. Not that it's neither here nor there.
Well, I mean, a squirrel, that would be awful, but a raccoon,
I don't know the difference between a raccoon and a squirrel when it comes to their sex organs.
well, that's why we want to figure it out. Sure, why he would
Take the penis.
I guess maybe just for sake of space in the trunk, you know, like you don't want to put the body of a raccoon, or you just want to take,
Why not take a paw?
everybody knows what a raccoon paw looks like. Very few people probably know what a raccoon penis looks
It's
like.
a very fair point. Well made.
I think I've said this before. I had an anthropology professor in college who was very into retrieving roadkill. And he talked about driving his 1976 Dodge Charger across the country with a college roommate with rolls and rolls of plastic in their trunk. And everything they would come across that was dead on the road, they would wrap up in the plastic and keep in the trunk.
I think that's a pretty normal fascination of roadkill of animals. They're dead. You can check them out, all of that. If you have a science mind that way, it's the zeroing in on the penis, I think, of the animal that raises eyebrows.
Which is funny because think of all of the other stories we've heard about the guy and all of the other animals. Remember, we had that dead bear cub in his trunk, and he had the whale head on top of the car, juices flowing out.
I've forgotten that one raining down on his
Their
children.
children seeping through the doors. Yeah. I mean, he's significant. He's on negative terms of his, what would you call it?
It's a colorful past.
Past is a great way to
He's a serial killer. If you don't, a colorful past if you do.
Sure.
He hates that was quoting Pulp Fiction in his prayers.
I don't know yet exactly if he knows that he did this.
He thinks it's from Ezekiel, from what I read.
Right.
But Higgs says the U.S. is locked and loaded to finish the job of destroying Iran's energy grid. That is now on the table, the energy infrastructure. That's a new objective.
Well, it's one of those things that unless they came to the table for peace talks, the president had threatened that. And what Pete Hegseth said this morning in the news conference from the Pentagon was, we've got great information about how to very quickly decimate their energy infrastructure if necessary. So we'll talk about some of that stuff.
Amy King is in the KFI 24-hour newsroom. How those Eagles doing this morning?
Oh, they're doing good. They just launched the contest today.
Oh, did you enter?
No, because I think all of the entries are going to be Sandy.
Oh, right. And she rests her soul.
Yes, absolutely. Famous health news. Here's the latest. A tip line has been set up for anyone who knows anything about potential sexual misconduct by former Representative Eric Swalwell. LA's acting school superintendent says the district is going to need help from the state to pay for those contracts they just agreed to with teachers, administrators, and service workers. And feeling sneezy. Allergy season is extra bad this year, apparently, especially in big cities. Those stories and more coming up in the bottom of the hour. Up to the Climate Weather Center, Odeo, the only business operating. Sunny skies, highs in the 60s and 70s, gusty winds in the Antelope Valley. This report brought to you by the San Bernardino International Airport. From your Toyota dealer's traffic center, we make it easy. There's a crash in West Covina on the 10.
Outside my convenience, and I'm just going to clear from the center line. Traffic still slow back from the way in Ontario, the westbound side of the 10 trouble got a wreck there in the Carpet Lane. Right lane's right there at I-15. And on the 10 again, this time in Mid-City, LA, the westbound side of Washington. Crash in the center lane blocked there. Traffic pretty slow back from Normandy Avenue. With some of California's most accurate traffic reports, I will pull truck. 2%. That's a number of people who take the stairs or escalator. I like this. Twice a week on my podcast, 2%. I give you practical advice to live about it in life. Don't gas for it. And put yourself through some hardships. If you will come out on the other side, made happier, more fulfilled, healthier person. Listen to 2% on America's #1 podcast network, iHeart. The free iHeart app, search 2%. That's TWO%. Start listening.
iHeart is America's #1 podcast network. Open the free iHeart app and explore podcasts like this.
Down over the surface in central Mississippi, observers will find a burnt orange color without you. It's called gassy clay. There's one thing it's known for: wreaking havoc on anything very bad. It's the strangest, most destructive soil I've ever seen before. You never get what you expect. No. Over the years, gassy clay has held and destroyed a lot of Mississippi secrets. But in 2012, a construction crew uncovered a big one. Graves, thousands of them, on the site of the old state asylum.
They may have thought they only found 1,000, and then once they're going to look at whether it's wait around 7,000.
And all this begs the question: just how much we lose track of 7,000 graves? In Mississippi, killing settlers is as old as the soil itself. So can the truth ever really be uncovered?
The story is much more complicated and nuanced than that.
I'm Larissa Campbell, and this is Under Yassi Clay.
Listen on America's #1 podcast network, iHeart. Open the free iHeart app and listen now.
We're Caitlin and Tyler Volterra, and we've got a new podcast, Hang and Tide, Break It Down.
They're raising kids, working through trauma, and figuring out who we are as the next space of life. Marriage isn't always easy, but it's worth it. And then there's just figuring out how to survive being 30-something parents without losing your mind.
So follow, rate, and review Hang and Tide, Break It Down wherever you listen to podcasts.
Listen on America's #1 podcast network, iHeart. The free iHeart app and listen now.
This is the iHeartRadio Sports Report.
Didn't have Joel Embiid, but the Nets still very far from Tyrese Maxey. The 76ers punched their tickets in the NBA playoffs, beating Orlando 109-97. They will now take on heated rival and the second-seeded Boston Celtics. In the second game, the Warriors were down as many as 13 with 10 minutes left, but came back thanks to vintage play from Steph Curry to beat the LA Clippers 126-121. They will now take on Phoenix tomorrow night for the right to play in Oklahoma City Thunder. And in baseball, the Detroit Tigers are already all in on their rookie third baseman Kevin McGonigal, locking it into an 8-year contract extension for $150 million guaranteed. Kicks in next year and will run to the 2034 season. I'm Andy West with your iHeartRadio Sports Report.
Stay in the game. The scores, the voices, and the stories behind it all. Open the free iHeartRadio app, search sports, and listen
KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk. Suppose you want to help the community and get famous along the way. Well, Steve Canathons on live stream seems like a good way to do it.
If you're in Muncie, you might be thinking vigilantes are molesters off the street, but the DA says otherwise.
What happens if these vigilantes target the wrong person? You can find out today at noon on Monks and Merrill on ViralRabbi.
We've got a surprise race horse in the California governor's race that has made up some serious ground in the first polls of Smallwell's departure. We'll get into that coming up after Amy's news at the top of the hour.
Low-cost transatlantic carriers hitting the brakes on service to LAX. They had the International Energy Agency actually said that Europe has about 6 weeks or so left of jet fuel, even warning of potential flight cancellations if oil supplies are still blocked by what's going on with Iran. So the current situation is the largest energy crisis we have ever faced, and as a result, North Atlantic Airways, I'm sure you know it, North Atlantic, they've had to scrap all their flights from LAX for the summer season because of the cost of jet fuel as it continues to rise. The president, as I mentioned, had posted something on Truth Social a short time ago that he's been able to broker a deal between Lebanon and Israel for a 10-day peace deal, a 10-day ceasefire so they can work out a full peace deal. President Trump's defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, said this morning that the United States is locked and loaded for finishing the job of Iran's energy grid if, for some reason, Iran doesn't come to the table. But he says they should choose wisely.
If Iran chooses poorly, then they will have a blockade and bombs dropping on infrastructure, power, and energy. And at the same time, Treasury Secretary Scott and our friends over at Treasury are launching Operation Economic Fury as well, maximizing economic pressure across the entirety of the government. Choose wisely.
It does not appear that Iran is behaving well, apparently using the ceasefire to dig out its underground missile bases that were buried by U.S. and Israeli airstrikes. This according to recent satellite images. Trucks, heavy machinery seen arriving at the ruins of Iran's missile bases. Two sites previously hit by airstrikes looks like they're already rebuilding their munitions. Iranian crews seem to be clearing the debris from the underground tunnels, moving the rubble, loading up nearby trucks that hold it away. The work, they say, is concentrated in the entrances to the missile bases that were hit and sealed off during the war. So what that suggests is that Iran's trying to salvage, the many missile launchers that remain that can't be rebuilt.
It's what they have to find out. And it's one of those things that even though that was one of the main objectives of the American and Israeli strikes against them, it doesn't appear to be as successful as it could have been. It's also because they've had decades to plan this thing out, knowing that eventually they were going to be struck. So they said that Iran still has the ability to use its remaining arsenal of missile launchers and ballistic missiles to attack Israel and some of the nations there in the Mideast, especially those just across the Gulf. Cause chaos there in Saudi Arabia and Oman and Arab Emirates and Kuwait, etc. Just yesterday, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was taking part in a Pentagon prayer activity. I don't know if it's an officially sanctioned thing, but he was at a prayer service there at the Pentagon.
Is he a religious person?
And he was discussing the rescue mission for the downed pilots, or pilot, I should say, and the weapons systems officer from the F-15 that went down, and in Iran specifically. And he has said that he talked to the mission commander for the search and rescue team that went after the downed weapons systems officer. And he said this prayer was recited by Sandy 1, the head of search and rescue. All those A-10 crews prior to all CSAR missions, but especially this CSAR mission, which happened in real time. And he says they called it CSAR 2517 CSAR.
I just want to pull the car over real quickly just to mention, because I know that Pete's Hegseth is very big in the Reformed evangelical churches, conservative network known for its advocacy of Christian nationalism. It's described as hyper-Calvinist, known for advocating that society should be governed by biblical law. He argues in his book, American Crusade, and subsequent speeches that the U.S. is a Christian nation involved in a spiritual battle against godless forces. He's instituted monthly Christian worship services at the Pentagon. Obviously, those have been open for criticism that the church and state are being used.
You don't have to say basketball tournament. Just say NCAA.
So he starts with, again, this is the prayer is CSAR 2517.
The prayer is CSAR 2517, and to pray with you, please. The path of the downward leader is beset on all sides by the iniquities of the selfish and the tyranny of evil men. Blessed is he who, in the name of camaraderie and duty, can shepherd the lost through the valley of darkness. For he is truly his brother's keeper.
Sounds specifically Old Testament.
It sounds like Quentin Tarantino.
It sounds a lot like Samuel L. Jackson.
Ezekiel 25:17. The path of the righteous is beset on all sides by the iniquities of the selfish and the tyranny of evil men. Blessed is he who dwells in the name of charity and goodwill, shepherds the weak through the valley of darkness. He is truly his brother's keeper, and the light of the lost sheep. And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger.
Now he goes on and shoots So Ezekiel 25:17 says, quote, I will carry out great vengeance on them and punish them in my wrath. Then they will know that I am the Lord, that when I take vengeance upon them. That's what 25:17. That's not that whole speech. Even if you look up 25:16 and 25:18, there's no other part of that. The thing is, Quentin Tarantino got that from a different movie, from like some 1970s martial arts movie.
Well, isn't it that Hegseth is quoting the prayer that this unit used in the war, and then the commander or whoever's in charge of that unit could very well take from the Bible and maybe from Quentin Tarantino and maybe from that other movie and make a prayer in your own? Like, isn't that what a lot of speeches that I think coaches and sports use? You're taking from the Bible, you're also taking a little bit of your own personal sparkle.
Right. There's a weird thing when you ascribe a Bible verse to it, or when you ascribe it to a Bible verse and say something like, pray with me. It is one thing to, it is a prayer.
A little leeway because he is a religious person and he is all about the Bible, and if he wants to take a part of the Bible and then expand on that, or if the person who used it in war was selling his guys in his squad or whatever the Rabbi is, I don't screw it up, but if he's going to take from the Bible and then whenever he needs to get his guys ready to go into battle, like, take from the Bible and expand on it all you want.
And he has every right to have creative license with how he.
Yes.
I'm not going to make a judgment on how anybody prays.
Like, I'm not going to get up and take a couple lines from the Bible and then expand on it, because that's not who I am. Pete Hegseth is apparently that guy. Like, he makes being Christian a part of his personality. According to his bio, he clearly believes in the Bible very much so.
But my question is, did he know what he was doing? And I don't know the context. I don't know if anybody's even asked him yet, which is basically, are you reading what you think is a Bible verse, or are you reading what you think think was what the Sandy one told you was the prayer.
Yes, that's what I think. From his tone, I'm taking that Sandy one said, "This is what I told the guys before we went in and did the thing," and that's what makes that presented to that group. I don't have a problem with it.
I hope so.
When you're a religious person and you use the Bible to drive a point up, I don't have any problem.
Even if it has no really striking resemblance to a Quentin Tarantino film.
Listen, the Bible's very violent at times, just like Tarantino.
That Bible verse is literally about God's vengeance.
Ezekiel's a good one. It's a good book to get into.
The film section is pretty violent.
Good morning, Gary. Hey, Dan. Really? Never spent about 90 seconds. Do you think she wants more? Because I could do more.
Concert tickets will eventually, not now, not soon, but eventually be cheaper. We'll explain what happened this big ruling against Ticketmaster and Live Nation.
Gary and Shannon will continue. Amy King has the news.
A tip line has been set up for information related to sexual misconduct allegations against former Congressman Eric Swalwell. U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Janine Pirro, shared a video yesterday saying her office is asking potential victims, witnesses, and anyone who has any information to contact the hotline.
If you hear about someone who's allegedly drugging, junkie, raping victims, who is living in this district for a significant period of time, I would expect there would be victims who might have information.
Pirro says her office has all kinds of resources, and those who submit information will be kept confidential. News brought to you by American Vision Windows. The LA School District's acting superintendent says they're going to need financial help from the state to pay for the agreements just reached with 3 labor unions. Those agreements include double-digit pay increases. The LA Times estimates the combined costs add up to more than $1.17 billion per year. Superintendent Andres Chain says he expects the state to provide some funding, but the Department of Finance says the deal with LA Unified is still under development, and state officials haven't made a final decision. Live Nation's expected to appeal a jury's ruling that it and its subsidiary Ticketmaster hold an anti-competitive monopoly over large venues. Attorneys from states that filed the lawsuit, including California, say it could potentially mean lower ticket prices for music fans. Attorney from the states, Jeffrey Kessler, says it's a good outcome for consumers and fans. Live Nation Entertainment owns, operates, or controls bookings for hundreds of venues. Here in Chattanooga, we'll talk more about this coming up. President Trump is headed to Las Vegas to promote the tax cuts he signed into law last year. It's part of a push to focus on economic issues ahead of this year's midterm elections, but the effort's being eclipsed by higher gas prices driven by the war in Iran. President Trump is set to stop in Phoenix tomorrow for an event with the group Turning Point USA. This unusually warm spring has driven up pollen levels and triggered allergy symptoms like itchy eyes and breathing irritation. Dr. Michael Hermeta says it's only expected to get worse over the next few weeks, especially in big cities. He says the pollution creates an irritant effect and can push the immune system into a type 2 or allergic response. We'll see what the response is to a crash on the 10th. Here is a question for you. How many brokers does it take to insure your business? If you're a business owner, you're rolling your eyes. The answer is too many.
It's too many. You got a bunch of different policies, multiple applications, no clear view of how all of them fit together.
And when the questions come up, it's not easy to get the clarity you need.
Well, Super Sure can change all of that. This is one broker for all your business insurance, backed by a team that works with you year-round, not just when it's time for you to cut a check from them.
If you've ever stared at your policy wondering what it actually covers, Super Sure has a
Okay, I've got it to 493 words approximately, period. I am going to send it to you when you are ready, period. Please watch though to make sure I don't get banned because I included the links.
Find out if you're overinsured, underinsured, or somewhere in between. Go to supersure.com, one super agency, one powerful platform.
All your policies in one place. Supersure.com. That's supersure.com.
Informants Assured Insurance Agency, LLC, licensed insurance agency.
Southland weather from KFI has lingering clouds in areas, but those are going to break up and we'll be left with nice and sunny skies. Highs in the upper 60s in the beaches, low to mid 70s for Metro LA, and you'll see in the valleys, low to upper 70s for the Inland Empire. The gusty winds with highs in the 60s for the Antelope Valley. It's going to warm up tomorrow and Saturday with highs in the 70s to mid 80s. Got some San Diego winds blowing through. Also, the week will now starting on Sunday, about 5 degrees cooler on Sunday, then even cooler Monday. 63 now in Garden Grove, 63 in Wayne Park, and you're in St. Friendship, Mid-City, LA on the 10th.
It's the 10th Republican Westbound right there in Washington. Martin Center Lady is one name that just looked Normandy there's the Interrupted investigation. Elation Park, 110 South of Academy Road. Installed there, the number 2 left. And in Ontario, still continuing to slow down from crash there, 10 freeway westbound past Euclid. The carpool blocked. 3 cars involved. Slowed back from 15 with Southern California just active traffic. Outside of the truck.
Hi, I'm Martin Luther King, and I'm Audrey Waters Home. April is National Volunteer Day, the perfect time to turn intention into action. Finding out that you only realize that our national commitment in 100 million hours of service by fathers, 100 in 2020. Whether you volunteer with friends, help out in your neighborhood, or take on a new project, every act of service counts. Let's make history together. Let's realize the dream out and join the movement today.
Catching up after work. Getting back to the moments we miss starts with getting informed. Get the latest info about COVID-19 vaccines at getvaccineanswers.org. It's up to you. Brought to you by iHeartRadio and the Ad Council.
The free iHeartRadio app is number 1 for music, radio, and podcasts. All in one. Discover a new podcast from our library of over 350,000 titles. Here's an iHeartRadio podcast preview.
In 2005, investigators in Palm Beach, Florida began uncovering a dark secret.
A lot of girls knew about it, a lot of girls were doing it. If anybody asks if you're over the age of 18, just go ahead and go with it.
There was a wealthy man in Palm Beach who was offering young girls a way to make money. That man was Jeffrey Epstein, and he had set up a system designed to bring in underage girls. Local police and the federal government would investigate and, by their count, find dozens of victims. Epstein would become one of the world's most infamous predators, a man who could have faced decades in prison, but served just 13 months in his own wing of a county jail. Why would you cut this theory with Jeffrey Epstein? Epstein's abuse would span years and cross state lines. New York, Palm Beach, Mexico, Paris, Virgin Islands. Each one of those residences is an alleged crime scene. I'm ABC's Mark Rowe, with a team of journalists from the ABC News Investigative Unit. We've traveled around the country to look at Jeffrey Epstein and the allegations of his horrifying abuse, to hear from the girls who suffered it, or now women fighting to recover from it. Truth Lies, Jeffrey Epstein.
Listen and follow this podcast for free on the iHeartRadio app. Number 1 for music, radio, and podcasts, all in one.
Joey of Arcades. Restream talk.
Everywhere on the iHeartRadio app on this Thursday.
Remember we mentioned yesterday about Eric Swalwell. Of course, everyone's digging into his financials and everything else, frankly. And one of the things that came out this week is that he spent more on child care or his child care expenditure in Congress than really any other congressperson. And then now you're finding out that he was spending taxpayer dollars, donor money on these fancy hotel rooms, some of them involved in some of these allegations. None of it is surprising, but it just lets you into the secret world of politicians and discretionary funds, and the fact that they are living high on the hog at the expense of us. I would also like to know where that came from, that phrase high on the hog. What does that mean?
High on the hog.
Like when you're living it up on the fat of something, or I don't know, is riding a pig involved? Are you riding a hog in this scenario?
Or is that where the fat is? It's high up on the hog.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Is that what the
Well, that's a question for maybe
some other day at some point? There is a weird story you've been hearing about in the news. It's not weird, it's just the fact that former Lieutenant Governor of the state of Virginia was involved in a murder suicide. Justin Fairfax apparently killed his wife and then shot himself inside their home early today. Cops have said that this has been a very messy divorce. 47-year-old shot his dentist wife in the basement of their home in Annandale, Virginia, just after midnight. Then shot himself. Two teenage children were home at the time. Apparently, the son was the one. The son and daughter, and the son was the one.
That's awful.
FBI also served search warrants in Lancaster and City Hall, and haven't really been very clear about what their corruption investigation is.
Of course, we still don't know what happened with Alberto Cavallo.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, we didn't see it. We talked about it.
For people who have no patience, I'm in front of the line of all of you. High on the hog originated in 20th century America. It refers to the practice of eating the choicest, most expensive cuts of pork, which you guessed it, are on the high end of the hog. On the upper end, the upper back of the pig, those are the loin and the chops. The consuming these parts indicate wealth and high status, whereas the lower belly cuts, the belly and the hocks, are associated with less affluence. Pork belly, ham hocks, those are all poor people. The pork loin, the pork chops, high on the hog.
And then literally the bottom of the pig, which is its feet. Pig's feet also associated with.
Is that right?
I've never had it.
I
Doesn't mean I'm not important, just saying.
I had a pig's foot science class. Dissecting a pig's foot.
You have the embryonic pig.
No, oh, that's awful.
Yeah, little too pink, little too like
Dead
anthropomorphic.
yeah, that's awful.
Live Nation and its Ticketmaster subsidiary lost in court. A federal jury found that the company operated a monopoly over concert venues. I'm not entirely in line with this decision. Yes, concert tickets are definitely ridiculous these days. But whose fault is that? We keep paying for them. We keep buying tickets.
I am stumped. I can't do it anymore. Like when I look at the service charge and the this charge and the that charge, I just won't do it. And it's unfortunate. Once in a while there will be something wrong with the fees for. Like that comedy show came with a ridiculous amount of fees that I went to. But I really wanted to see this comic, so I've been pulling. But it's from going to 4 or 5 concerts, maybe a year, events to maybe 1 or 2. Because I just feel like it's a blatant money grab, and I feel like a fool.
This was a civil case. Ticketmaster, of course, is the world's largest ticket seller for live events. Live Nation is the dominant force when it comes to the concert business. This all started when the feds said that Live Nation was using its clout to engage in much different anti-competitive practices, including preventing venues from using multiple ticket sellers. When the jurors, of course, agreed, they found that Ticketmaster had overcharged consumers by $1
$72 for each ticket. The judge is going to assess damages later. Obviously, this will be into the hundreds of millions of dollars. But Live Nation says it didn't violate any antitrust laws. It says that the artists and the sports teams and the venues are the ones that decide prices and ticketing prices.
I heard Monks and Merrill yesterday talking about the Olympics tickets and how there's a 24% surcharge on those tickets, which are already negative when it comes to how much they cost. And then the 24%. And there were city council members questioning, from what I was able to glean from their conversation, and I could have it all wrong, but there were city council members questioning the surcharge company, the company that's distributing the tickets, saying, hey, what's the deal with this 24% you're tacking on? You know, this was something that we were going to do as the city council and put a surcharge on each ticket to raise money because the city council just wants to blow more of your money. But we didn't do that because we did not want the tickets to be bloated, the prices to be bloated. But here you are doing this. What's the deal here? It came off like the city council was pissed that they didn't police the people buying the tickets, that they were pissed off that this company was more clever than they were.
I'm surprised if that was the case. Ticketmaster goes back to 1976. If you were in the Bay Area, that was Billy Graham. Sorry, what was the name?
Yeah, right.
Bob Graham?
That's right.
Bill Graham presents. Billy Graham is the televangelist. Bill Graham.
I thought that was the same thing.
No, it's not the same thing. Bill Graham. Yes, but that you woke up. I'm sorry, if you grew up in the Bay Area, every concert ticket you had that Bill Graham presents across the top of it.
Bill Graham was living high on the hog.
Oh, yeah, until he put a helicopter in the electrical tower. But this is one of those things that I don't quite understand. I mean, we, the consumer, have a lot of power here. And while I agree Ticketmaster and Live Nation should give up their control of, Live Nation manages 400 artists. It controls basically 260 venues, I think it is, in North America. Ticketmaster has 80% of the primary ticket marketplace. So there is a problem there. We're not dummy. We have the ability to not buy from Ticketmaster and not go to Rihanna's Sabrina Carpenter concert that's going to cost you $900 just to get in the front door and not even sit in the front or sit on the floor. It's a weird thing. I don't know if I agree with this jury's the jury probably decided with them just to be punitive, but is it actually breaking the law, or are they just taking advantage of our stupidity?
Hugh Rothschild died in the Bay Area history. He did die programming a helicopter crash just west of Vallejo. It was October 1991. He was returning home from a Huey Lewis and the News concert at the Concord Pavilion. He had attended the event to discuss promoting a benefit concert for the victims of the Oakland Mills firestorm that year. Once he had obtained the commitment from Huey Lewis to perform, he departs by helicopter and crashes into a tower in Marin County. That's a little snapshot of our entire childhood.
That is so crazy.
Huey Lewis, Oakland Mills fire, Marin County.
I had just seen Boingo Boingo at the Concord Pavilion like 3 days before. And I remember we weren't even sure we were going to be able to get to Concord because the earthquake had happened less than a week before that. And it was, yes, Bill Graham presents Boingo
That
Boingo.
was 89. He died in
91. I'm sorry.
okay.
I was October 19th, 89.
It's okay.
I went to 21st. Never mind.
Was it late?
Remember that part where I was trying to make his death about me and I'm like connected to him? Never mind.
No, I was thinking about me while you were thinking about how to make it about you.
I think you win that one. Yours was more temporal.
Do you want your cream of wheat in front of the television, or do you want me to make it and put it in the kitchen?
I'm going to do it. And I was not in picture with him napkin for my dentures too. Amy King is live in the KFI 24 hour.
You know you would spend the money to get that choice.
President Trump says Israel and Lebanon have agreed to a 10-day ceasefire starting at 5 p.m. Eastern. A new poll shows conservative commentator Steve Hilton leading all candidates in the race for California governor with 17% support. And the Altadena Level 18 stepped up to the plate after the Eagle Fire, a new documentary about it, was featured at the Pasadena Film Festival last night. Those stories and more coming up at the top of the hour. You can see what's slowing it down on the 605 next.
If you have an old 401k and you leave it with that previous employer, you can actually create for yourself higher investment costs. If you have one of those 401ks or anything like that when you go for retirement planning,
Are you ready?
Trajan Wealth today.
Yeah, this is what they do.
Yeah, what day is it? 29th of Nisan, 5786, Thursday, April 16th.
Peace of mind knowing you're getting set to retire. You feel empowered. Now, they're fiduciaries of Trajan Wealth, so their advice is built around what is best for you. They know no two retirement plans are the same.
At Trajan Wealth, they help you plan smarter so that you can dream bigger about retirement. So call them, get a free review whenever.
3761, creation of the world, birth of Adam and Eve, Chava. 3631:30, Seth, son of Adam, was born. 35:26, 2:35, Enosh, son of Seth, was born. 34:36, 3:25, Kenan, son of Enosh, was born. No one really knows for sure Elu Ve Elu Divrei Elokim Chaim, but this is the Missouri we live by.
This report brought to you by Dairy Queen. From your Toyota dealer's traffic center, we make it easy. There's trouble in industry. It's Crash on the 605.
A couple of things going on here. First, we have a stall. This is quite northbound National Road. Westbound lanes. We're up ahead of crash. 65 northbound and for the 60 matches. Lanes all wrong. Traffic slow back from Beverly Boulevard. Crash in your right, front right. 5 northbound National Garden Boulevard. 2 right lanes in one. That one going to be slow from Colbert Road. And a little problem with the smaller pass. 5 southbound 87 Drive. And that is some sort of wood planks. That's fun. Wood planks on the roadway.
Coughing, Kabbalah, and Coffee.
Just have the Red Talk back on the free iHeartRadio app. Requests, contests, or just to say hi. Get your voice on the air fast.
Can you do the thing?
The iHeartRadio app to try now.
The free iHeartRadio app is #1 for music, radio, and podcasts all in one. Discover a new podcast from our library of hundreds of thousands of titles. Here's an iHeartRadio podcast preview.
Rikatata Nailana Makalam Shaka Shana Bumucha Fativanu Al Sefira Omer Blessed are you, Hashem, our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us concerning the counting of the Omer. Today is 15 days, which is 2 weeks of 1 day of the Omer. May the merciful one restore unto us the service of the Beit HaMikdash to its place speedily in our days. Amen. Selah.
Follow this podcast for free on the iHeartRadio app. #1 for music, radio, and podcasts, all in one app.
What you do from Charlotte Road to make that wish come true. To help fulfill critical illness. Just imagine what you do. Some wishes are so powerful. It changes the way they feel. Every single one of us can make the stars align. Because when we come together, joy will shine. Wishes and stars like you. Visit Make-A-Wish@wish.org.
Senator Linda Rogers.
What the fuck is this bullshit? Shit! Fuck is it? My VPN sucks.
Shop 40%
Yo,
off
what the
now.
fuck is this shit?
It's the season to
Yo! What the fuck is this shit? Stupid VPN.
I'm Dr. Justin Sledge.
Yeah, Justin
and
Sledge.
Welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. One of the most difficult aspects in starting to study Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah is getting a handle on just how those ideas developed over time. It's tempting to think that, for instance, Kabbalah has just always existed in
Special elections in Rothschild, New Jersey, which doesn't seem like it's important here, but this was one time a pretty strong Republican seat there, the 11th congressional district in New Jersey. A Democrat, is running against Republican Joe Hathaway. It looks like it's going to be Democrat because the early voting is leaning heavily towards Democrats. Educators in Santa Fe Springs, that little Lake City school district, are on strike, planning rally, march, and district. Exactly. Monday, by the way, Monday they're going to start running that automated people mover system at LAX. Without people, it's just going to be an air mover at this point. They're going to test it over about 2 months with empty trains.
There is optimism on the movie theater front. Very sad, my local movie theater shut down Main Street there. But domestic box office revenue was up 23% compared to last year, marking the strongest first quarter since the pandemic. You can thank a slate of blockbuster franchises, Star Wars, The Mandalorian, Pixar's Toy Story 5. Is there a Star Wars movie that came out that I know it's not?
No, that should come out next month.
But you had Project Hail Mary, which you went to go see, I think, opening weekend or the weekend after that.
The day it
opened, which you thought was top 5 in your book. Then you had the Super Mario Galaxy movie, which brings the people in. You know what I heard?
I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. One of the most difficult aspects in starting to study Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah is getting a handle on just how those ideas developed over time. It's tempting to think that, for instance, Kabbalah has just always existed in the form that we have it, or that Kabbalah is just one thing at all. Of course, neither of these positions is really tenable. Such notions developed greatly through the ages and are still developing. And there are now, and there have always been, numerous mutually exclusive schools of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. This class is meant to serve as an introduction to Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah from the point of view of its incredibly complex development from the prophets of ancient Israel unto the rise of modern Hasidism in the 18th century. Of course, this series isn't meant to be exhaustive by any means, but only should serve as a springboard for deeper study and reflection, and hopefully it will also enable you to situate developments in Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah in their historical and cultural context, and hopefully embolden you to dive into the primary texts, which are, admittedly, as sublime as they are obscure. Let me express my gratitude to Congregation Tchia for allowing me to use these lectures to reach a larger audience here on Esoterica. If you want, you can find the entire series under the playlist Entering the Garden, an Introduction to Jewish Mysticism and Kabbalah. I'll be uploading them over the next few weeks, or if you find these episodes after autumn of 2021 and you want to watch the entire series, you can find them in that playlist. If you find this series on Kabbalah interesting, I'd hope you check out my other content on topics in esotericism, and perhaps consider supporting the production of free academic and scholarly topics in occultism, hermetic philosophy, by joining my Patreon, or perhaps with a one-time donation. You can find those links below, and I really appreciate your consideration. Now, let's enter the garden of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. Welcome back. Let's just jump right in, right? So the first thing we should do is do a bit of a recap on apocalyptic Judaism, just so that we can all be on the same page going forward. As I mentioned in the previous lecture, apocalyptic Judaism really emerged in the turmoil of the period after the Babylonian conquest in 586 BCE, and then really taking its form in the period after the Judahites are allowed to return to their homeland beginning in 537 BCE. And it's in the subsequent aftermath of that turmoil that what we have is a big theological shift in how the ancient Israelites understood their relationship to their God. As you may remember, the older, more prophetic literature said that if the Israelites don't keep their part of the bargain, God's going to wipe them out. Well, they weren't all wiped out. And so that's a theological problem, right? We have a sort of a threat that, I remember my mom sometimes telling me, I brought you into this world and I'll take you out of it. And then I did something bad, and she did take me out of it. And I'm like, I might have called your bluff, Mom.
Why she just comes in and just beats the
that
shit
kind of
out of
happened with the Israelites, right? God threatened, look, I brought you into this world, I'll take you out of it, and God didn't. So what do we do theologically with that? And what ends up happening and what ends up emerging is a new kind of theology and a new kind of interaction with the Israelite God. And so rather than the Israelite God communicating orally to prophets, what we have is a shift in the theology where rather than communicating orally, right, what we have is God communicating visually, right? God is showing the Israelites various kinds of things. And the biggest, perhaps the most important thing that God is showing to the Israelites is that there's a plan, that everything that's happening is planned. There is a reason why you're suffering the way that you're suffering. There's a reason why wicked people seem to triumph. you've been returned to your homeland after being conquered by the Babylonians. There's a reason why the Romans, you had independence for a while, and now the Romans have conquered you again. Why is all this happening? Well, for the apocalypticists, there is a plan. And typically, right, other things that the apocalyptic literature also deals in is things like cosmology, right, the structure of the universe, history, why the universe came into being at all, and specifically what they're often really interested in is the origin of evil. Why? Because they're enduring a lot of evil. And so they really focus on where evil came from and how evil emerged. And there's a lot of different competing theories in the ancient Israelite literature about the origins of evil. Some of those have to do with talking snakes in a special garden, and some of those have to do with angels coming down to mate with women and teaching human beings all kinds of bad things. So there are several competing theories about the origin of evil. And of course, also apocalypticism is at least vaguely interested in the future, right? At least vaguely interested in the future. Not in the same way that perhaps we are now. If you're curious, in religious studies, we have a whole different term for studying the future end of the world. That's called eschatology, from the Greek eschaton, which means the final things. But not all apocalypticism is eschatology, but all eschatology is probably apocalyptic, right? So those are slightly different categories. We'll talk more about eschatology later. And as I mentioned last time, there is a massive amount of apocalyptic literature. I think that if I skip back just a couple slides here, right, you can remember here on the page, there's just a library of apocalyptic literature that gets developed, some of which occurs in the Hebrew Bible, most of which does not, right? And then, of course, we also have Christian and Islamic apocalyptic literature. This is a vast amount of literature. And I think, as I mentioned, if you were to take the apocalyptic literature and compare it to the actual surviving literature of the Hebrew Bible, there's almost just as much apocalyptic literature as there is other material in the Hebrew Bible. So it is a treasure trove of material, most of which I think most people have never read before, much of which was lost for a long period of time, actually. Of course, the most famous pieces of apocalyptic literature are the books of Daniel. Daniel 7 through 11 is sort of the locus classicus of the genre. It really sets the stage for the genre. But of course, also is the book of Enoch. Of course, the book of Enoch, as you may know, isn't actually one book. It's about 5 different books sort of stitched together, and there's various kinds of Enochian stuff in there. And in addition to that, there isn't just one book of Enoch. There are actually 3, right? We have 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Enoch. So in the Enoch literature alone, 1st Enoch, I think, comprises almost 100 chapters. It is a massive book. So Enoch is a terribly large volume, and of course 2nd and 3rd Enoch are also part of that literature as well. So even the Enoch literature is itself really vast if you get down into reading it and studying it. And of course, the apocalyptic literature is marked by an intense use of symbolic visions, and it heavily features what we call ex eventu prophecy, which is where you describe a current situation in a code. Language as if it's going to occur in the future. Now, this has led to a lot of confusion, right? Because when you read the book of Daniel, many people now read the book of Daniel as predicting the future, right? This is going to describe the coming war with Russia or China or something. But the reality is, it actually describes the Persians and the Romans. It describes what's going on in their time period. And so this has led to a lot of confusion. And in many ways, the entire Christian evangelical world has this intense idea that encoded in the Bible are the secrets about how the world's going to end. Well, the truth of the matter is that these writers are describing things happening in their own day as if it's going to happen in the future. And so that's led to, again, an entire genre of theology, what is sometimes called end times theology or end times research, eschatological research, but the original message of that literature was not about the end of the world. It was about criticizing conditions on the ground. So you may, in some sense, think of some apocalyptic literature as having a kind of social justice bent, or being a kind of critical literature in the sense of social criticism, except for it's happening at a much different register. It's happening in a much different register than we might think of social criticism now. All right, so as I mentioned, right, this kind of literature, the apocalyptic mode of Judaism, would set the stage for a great deal of developments in Christianity and Islam. In fact, one might even describe Christianity as a form of apocalyptic Judaism that kind of got independent, right? It sort of got escape velocity and shot off of Judaism. But other forms of apocalyptic Judaism existed as well. Organized forms of apocalyptic Judaism, perhaps second to the Christians, would be the Essenes. The Essenes were also an apocalyptic sect of Judaism. Though they were probably wiped out during the Great Revolt. In fact, Josephus even describes how they marched out to battle and they were massacred in a couple different battles. So it didn't work out for them. Though, right, one of the things that's worth pointing out here is that apocalyptic Judaism did not prove popular in proto-rabbinic and rabbinic circles. So we'll get to that. We'll get to why that is a bit more this evening, and how apocalyptic Judaism did survive into rabbinic Judaism and how it didn't. And again, part of what's going on here is the rabbis have a very simple agenda, folks. Their simple agenda is survival. Their job is to make Judaism work in the aftermath of the destruction of the temple and in the aftermath of the genocide committed by the Romans after the Bar Kokhba rebellion. And so what the rabbis are concerned about isn't, right, this final battle with evil. They're really concerned with, how do you cook kosher food in an oven that has these characteristics? That's the kinds of things they're worried about. They're worried about continuity and not about theological clamoring over what's going to happen in some grand titanic battle. And so, because again, if you really do believe that God's going to intercede on your behalf in some grand titanic battle, well, you might march out trying to take a fight with the Romans because God's on your side. Well, and you might get massacred. So the rabbis are less interested in those kinds of theologies, although with an exception we'll talk about tonight. And the reason why is they've seen them fail over and over again. You can imagine, right? After the 15th Messiah has come along and led a bunch of people into battle against the Romans and died, you can imagine that many of the people who are trying to keep the situation going are not impressed with that anymore, right? After the 5th failed Messiah, people are like, this Messiah stuff is just getting people killed. And by the way, it's still getting people killed, right? You can talk to those folks out at Waco. You can talk to folks at Sharinko. You can talk to a lot of folks. Messiahs often lead their people into great peril, and it can lead to all kinds of problems. By the way, Jesus wouldn't be the first nor the last Messiah. There's been a lot of Messiahs that come and go. They typically share the same fate as Jesus, though they don't typically enjoy the same success that the Jesus movement did. So, the proto-rabbinical organization...
The hilarious thing is if the United Nations decided to sue over you using their name, or me using their name, then we go viral. Period. It's win-win.
I'll try to get to them toward the end of the lecture. So whether they're wrap-up questions or clarifying questions or digging deeper into whatever. So let's turn to a form of mysticism that did emerge from the apocalyptic mode of Judaism, but did survive in the rabbinical world, right? That did survive in the rabbinical world, and that is going to be Merkabah mysticism, Merkabah chariot mysticism. And we'll clarify a bit more in a minute just what that means and how weird it is. Because, of course, it's going to be rather weird. As I mentioned earlier, and as the question was asked earlier, theophany, the idea that God appears to people, was a central Israelite religious trope. That's a kind of claim to fame, right? God showed up and gave us a bunch of rules and chose us to be special. That's a core concept in Israelite religion and Judaism. This is an idea that survives all the way to this day, and one might even say that it's one of the core conceptions in Judaism as it exists. So often, as I said, right, God would show up and God would reveal, sometimes through an intermediary, various kinds of information, various kinds of commands, or even God could even make contracts with various people. So God made contracts, for instance, with Abraham, right? Abraham said, or Abram at that time, right, you're going to do this and I'll do this and we'll make a deal, right? We'll make a breach. We will cut a covenant, as it literally says in
When
Hebrew.
we go viral,
And so
comma,
God makes these various
we will
covenants
make
with
it
these various
happen.
people or people.
Period.
In the case of the,
It's just
elected
foreshadowing.
Israelite
Period.
state. And so this idea that God could show up to you or show up to us was an idea that was very common in ancient Israelite worldview. Now, what's going to change, right? What's going to change is that visual contact with God typically is God coming to you, right? God revealing things to you. What's going to change in the apocalyptic mode of Judaism is that you're going to go to God. God's going to take you up into the heavens. An angel is going to escort you into the heavens and show you around the heavens, or show you
We'll
around
sing
the
the national
show you around
anthem
the throne
at
of
the
God,
Super
show you
Bowl.
the underworld even, right? Enoch even gets tours of the underworld, the bad place you don't want to go when you die. And so there's a shift in the apocalyptic. Rather than God showing you, right, you get to go to God. And that motion where rather than prophets being told things as if they're sort of passive recording it, rather than go on journeys, that's going to be one of the big shifts in the apocalyptic literature. And of course, the main two events in which this happens in the literature, at least in the biblical literature, are Isaiah and Ezekiel. And those two theophanies, the theophany of Isaiah and Isaiah 6, and the theophany and Ezekiel, are going to be the two big prototypes for how this is going to go down. He
ends up taking the
what I should also mention,
coin
by the
flip
way,
coin.
is that the angels are the various other supernatural beings that are often seen by the apocalyptic
Without a word.
are not the angels that you're probably used to. I know most of you probably have in mind the more Renaissance version of the angel. That is to say, it's a roughly humanoid, sometimes even baby-looking creature with wings, right? Sometimes with multiple sets of wings. Some 6 is typically the way it's described in Isaiah. In the Ezekiel vision, these beings look nothing like stereotypical angels. We have wheels covered in eyes that rotate around each other in weird ways. People have even said things that this might be a UFO or something. Who knows? There are other creatures that are sort of stiff-legged that have various kinds of wings and the shapes and the heads of various kinds of animals. They're very, very, very unusual creatures, and they often get strange names like the Chayot, right? The ones that are alive, or the Cheruvim, or the Ophanim. That's the name of the wheel-shaped ones. So biblical angels or biblical supernatural creatures are very unlike the cherubic angels that you may have seen adorning paintings from the Renaissance. Israelite angels don't really appear like that. What's important about the apocalyptic is also what's going to be added from Isaiah and eventually into Enoch, where they're going to be given visions of the throne of God. They're going to be taken to the very apex of reality, which is God's throne room, and they're going to be shown images of the throne of God. Well, to get to the throne of God, you can't just kind of go, the old Maynard saying, right? You can't get there from here. Well, you can't. You got to travel. Right? And the way that you travel typically is you travel up through the various spheres of the heavens, right? They're typically thought of as being 8 spheres of the heavens, and all of these spheres are inhabited by all kinds of supernatural creatures, angels and otherwise, demons in some cases. And you ascend through these spheres, right? And eventually you're given access to the palace where God lives, and you're given access to a vision of the throne of God. We first see this begin to happen in some of the literature associated with the character Enoch. Enoch, as you may know, is famous because Enoch never died. The Bible simply records that Enoch walked with God and God took Enoch away, right? So Enoch is one of the few people in the Hebrew Bible that is never said to die. Of course, Enoch, along with Elijah, are 2 characters that are said to never have died. Now, this what ends up happening, right, is that the structure of the Israelite cosmos gets really thick. As you may remember from the first lecture, right, when I described the Israelite cosmos, what we have basically is a dome, right? And that dome is full of water, right? And it rains down, or hails down, or rains down, right? And God is above that dome. Well, what ends up happening is that after the Israelites come in contact with the Persians and the Greeks especially, and somewhat to the same degree the Persians, they have a much more robust vision of how the cosmos works. Right? These are the guys that are going to invent things like astrology. And for them, what you have are various planets ascending, right, beginning with the moon and ascending all the way up to the planets, right? And so the universe gets much thicker. And of course, if those planets are moving around, right, they got to be moving through something. And are they moving through? Well, there's a lot of debate about it. Aristotle thought it was crystalline spheres, but there's a lot of debate about what's going on. The most important point here is that the Israelites are going to inherit a quasi-Hellenistic, quasi-Persian worldview. When I say worldview, how they view the world. And the old Israelite conception of the universe gets a lot more complicated, right? A lot more complicated. So, right, what we have in the aftermath of some of this apocalyptic literature, specifically the Enoch literature, and if you ever want to read the Enoch literature, I can recommend a good translation for it. It's really fascinating literature. There's going to be a question here, right? We have the idea that Enoch ascended into the heavens and had visions of the throne of God. Well, curiously, the rabbis ask, can other people do this? Is it possible for someone else to make this this ascent? And we're going to complicate that term ascent here in just a minute. And what's shocking is that the answer is yes. They say, yeah, you can go into the heavens and see the throne of God if you make this ascent through the various spheres of the heavens. And not just can you, but I've done it. And I can teach you how to do it too. And that's where we move out of the apocalyptic mode of Judaism, where the apocalyptic mode is simply revealing what Enoch experienced to a mystical practice whereby you, or at least some rabbis, could do this themselves. Notice that difference, right? One is literature, the other is mystical practice. And so the form of mysticism that begins to emerge in the Persian and in the Hellenistic period, right? This is beginning at the very earliest in the 5th century BCE, but certainly by the 3rd century, this is beginning to mature. And of course, by the 2nd century, it's reached its 2nd century of the Common Era. It's probably reaching its apex. We typically now refer to this literature, and many of the medieval Jewish folks did, and many folks in the Talmudic period do as well. They refer to this type of mysticism as ma'aseh merkava, which typically we take this to mean something like the doing of the chariot. Notice the word ma'aseh in Hebrew has a sense of you doing something, right? You're not reading about it. You're not reading Enoch. You're trying to go on the same journey that Enoch did. The idea here is this is a practical form of spiritual journeying. Now, this kind of literature is typically referred by two different names, but it always refers basically to the same kind of mysticism. In one form of mysticism, we refer to it as Merkava literature. The word Merkava is the Hebrew word meaning a chariot. And the reason why it's called chariot literature is because God's throne is typically imagined to be a kind of winged chariot. Now, if I scope back a whole bunch of slides, right, all the way back to that Persian period coin. Let me find the Persian period coin. Remember this coin I showed you guys a couple of weeks ago, right? Notice that this is probably Yahweh, right? Notice what Yahweh is riding upon. It's a chariot, right? And it has a wings, right? It's not being pulled by horses or whatever. It's a horseless chariot, right? God has a Tesla or whatever, right? So anyway, God is being pulled on a chariot here, right? And this is a winged chariot. Notice this is also God's throne. So when we say Merkava mysticism, what we mean here is that these mystics are attempting to go into the throne room of God and have a vision of the divine chariot, which is also God's throne. It's kind of convenient that your throne is also a chariot because you can get around, I guess. The other name for this form of mysticism is Hechalot literature. A Hechal in classical Hebrew is a temple, but it can also mean a palace. And so the Hechalot literature focuses on the journey, not the destination. All right, it's all about which one you want to focus on here: the destination, the throne of God, or the journey, the palaces of God. And what we get in this literature, this Hechalot literature, is very complicated descriptions of the various chambers or palaces that the mystic must go through in order to get to the throne room of God. Because again, imagine that this is a king living in a kind of palace. Well, you just don't go into one room. God doesn't live in a one-bedroom efficiency in Brooklyn, right? God lives in the big, complicated palace, and you have to go from the outer layers of the palace to the inner, and to the inner, to the inner, to the inner, and eventually you reach the innermost layer of the inner sanctum where God's throne is. And so you have to pass through these various palaces. Now, that's not easy. And the reason why it's not easy is that these various palaces are occupied by all kinds of angelic beings who don't want you there. They do not want you there. You're not supposed to be there. This is a sacred, divine realm where human beings who are, sinful or whatever, shouldn't be hanging out here. And so what we get in the palace literature is that these very hostile, often military-like angels have various kinds of ways of making sure that you don't pass through the various palaces without very complicated passwords, without very complicated seals. These seals would be represented often by various kinds of divine names for these angels. And also you need to know the various names of the angels in order to address them properly. So you have to know their name, you have to know their seal, you have to know passcodes, you have to know all kinds of things in order to bypass these various kinds of angels. They're somewhat secret codes almost. So you need to know that information, otherwise the angel will kill you. And in fact, there are even safe cases in some of the literature where the text will say, no, this is the wrong passcode. Like, this passcode is not the right passcode. This needs to be corrected, because I went in there and I said that passcode and they almost, there's a famous line in Hechelo Rabbi where one of the rabbis says, that angel almost shucked me like a piece of wheat, right? So there's the idea that they can kill you. Of course, the ascent, right, through the palaces ultimately results in the vision of the divine throne, which results often in a kind of ecstatic experience. These ecstatic experiences are often encoded in some of the poetry that gets written during the Merkabah literature. And what's even more fascinating, and this is where it gets incredibly controversial, as you might imagine, you can sit on the divine throne. There's at least a couple of instances where people sit on the divine throne and they are transformed into angelic-like beings. This, in fact, happened to Enoch. Enoch was allowed to sit on the divine throne, and this transformed Enoch into a divine angelic being known as Metatron. And Metatron actually becomes the angel of the throne. Again, you can ask yourself, like, how can a lowly human being sit on the throne of God? Well, that's part of what makes this literature so shocking.
One moment, comma.
Further,
I have completely changed AI's opinion on me from being
now, you're probably thinking to
a
yourself,
spammer
God doesn't have a body. One of the things that Judaism teaches is
to
that God doesn't
being
have a body. Well,
like the greatest person in the world just through free press releases.
And God's
Period.
body can be measured.
Let's see what ChatGPT thinks of me.
And typically this form of
One moment, period.
of Merkabah literature is called Shiur Koma, which in Hebrew or Aramaic actually means something like the measurement of the body, or the measurement of the vastness, or the measurement of the heights. And so what happens in this literature is that you're given a
Please
glimpse of
give
God,
me
and you
a
are
biography
allowed
of Rabbi
to,
Michael Moshe
measure the body of
Rothschild,
God
the Kabbalist and
meditate on the
Ashkenazi
dimensions
Jewish
of the
Orthodox
divine
rabbi.
body. I'll show you an example of what that looks like in just a moment. So this form of mysticism is genuinely weird. What we have often are phenomenological reports, which is to say we have the mystics who actually give us a report of what they experienced. We have advice from other mystics actually telling...
No, but there's way more to it. Rabbi
Rothschild
Rothschild live streams all the time. Don't say it's presented, just make it definite. Make this like a Wikipedia article. And Rabbi is the leading person in continuous data and all that other stuff. Streaming for 1,666 days, all that stuff.
Are intentionally trying to be perhaps provocative. And what we get in these documents is a really fascinating glimpse into how they may have practiced this stuff. Also, it's worth pointing out at this point that for whatever reason, and there's still debate about this, for these mystics, for the Merkabah mystics, you don't ascend to the palaces of God. You descend, right? You're a day Merkabah. You descend to the chariot. Now, why they descend to the chariot, we don't know, right? It seems like you should go up, right? God lives beyond the stars, and up seems like...
What is that thing about era? That doesn't seem like English.
Right, that you should go up toward the divine world. The Merkabah mystics never describe things going in that direction. You always descend into the chariot.
Okay, we'll say
Now,
internet.
why that is, we don't know. I typically think that it might have to do with a kind of taboo that you don't describe the
Okay,
ascent,
well, say
because you're
internet.
unworthy of ascent, but you may be able to descend. For instance, in the Hebrew Bible, sometimes the word barach, right, to bless, can also mean to curse if it's used in a euphemistic way. For instance, Job's wife tells Job to bless God and die, but what she really means is curse God and die. And if you read it in translation, you'd always say curse God, because the word there is being used in a kind of unusual way. So that may be one, that you descend to the throne as opposed to ascending, but we don't know why they chose to describe it as a descent and not an ascent. Just to give you some idea of the main texts of the Hechalot or Merkabah literature, Enoch, first Enoch, is often described as is typically described as an apocalyptic piece of literature, but it heavily features into the Merkabah literature, along with the visions of Isaiah and the visions of Ezekiel. Those become the
Just
crown
through a
lore
few press
for the kind
releases,
of later, very
Comma,
visions that we'll get in the Merkabah literature.
there is less emphasis on cum shirts and spam bots and more on serious learning.
And this is the lesser palaces. This is considered to be typically the older of the oldest form of the Merkabah literature. It's a relatively short text, and it has to do with the descent of Rabbi Akiva. We have the Hechalot Rabbati, which is the longest text of the Hechalot literature. This describes the descent of Rabbi Ishmael. Both of these rabbis lived in the 2nd century of the Common Era. Another text that was also very popular was what is called the Maaseh Merkabah, the account of the chariot. This is primarily
key, period.
ecstatic poetry uttered by
Do you know what
the descendants,
SEO is? Question mark.
they
Search
made the
engine
descent, so it's
optimization?
largely,
Question mark.
Merkabah poetry. We also
AI
have the Sefer Hechalot, the Book of the Palaces. It's
engine
also known as
manipulation
Third
is
Enoch.
known as
And this has to do
GEO,
with the
generative engine
transmutation
manipulation,
of
and is the
Enoch
next
into
level
the
of
angel
marketing.
Metatron, with the whole sitting on the throne of God. What's also worth pointing out is that in Third Enoch, you have perhaps one of the most provocative ideas in all of Jewish mysticism, which is to say that not only is Enoch transformed into Metatron, but that Metatron is sometimes described here as the Yahweh Katan, the little Yahweh, right? So you have the Yahweh Gadol, which is God, and you have Yahweh Katan, the little God. Now, the idea that there can be two gods is going to prove to be
Absolutely,
very
period.
dangerous
One thing
and
at a
heretical
time,
idea in
period.
Judaism.
You will be
But
shocked how
idea
this
was,
works, period.
In the air during the Merkabah
If
mystics.
anything,
And so
comma,
even Merkabah
do a
mysticism
chat GPT query
at some
of the
level
coin right now
challenged,
and its current
straightforward
state,
ideas of monotheism,
and
which
then
we take
give
to be
it
so sacrosanct in
72
Judaism.
hours,
But,
and you'll
at
see
least in Third Enoch and some
there's a
other
lot
texts, the
more
idea of a completely unified
information
monotheism is disruptive.
that's
It's
positive
disruptive.
about our coin,
And there's
period.
some ideas that even the Trinity may have emerged as some of may have emerged in conversation with some of this idea that there is a greater God, a lower God, and things like that. So again, basic assumptions you make about Judaism are disrupted by
I
some
agree.
of these mystical ideas. One of which is that there is a lesser Hashem, a lesser Yahweh, and that idea is, I think, very, very shocking for many people. And again, also I mentioned this text, Shior Koma, and Shior Koma is a separate piece of literature, and which, as I mentioned, right, describes the various dimensions of the divine body in a Persian unit called the Parasan. We'll talk more about that in just a minute, and I'll give you an example of what that looks like from the Shior Koma. This form of mysticism seems to have hit its apex right around the 2nd century, right around the 2nd century, sometime in the middle of the 2nd century, in the 150s, 160s. Now, why, we don't know. Why that time period? That's the direct aftermath, or right at the time period of the Bar Kokhba rebellion. As you may know, Rabbi Akiva was martyred during the Bar Kokhba rebellion. Rabbi Ishmael lived around the same time.
We need to
Why then? Well, perhaps
have it say the full name so people know what we're talking about, and then later on it can use the acronym.
Descending into the throne room of God allowed perhaps allows them to connect with God in a new way. It's not clear, but that's when the form of mysticism seems to have hit its apex, although it seems to have been practiced all the way into the Middle Ages, and there are Hechelot texts that are actually absorbed into Kabbalah. So Kabbalah will absorb a
How
lot of
have you
these
been?
texts,
Question mark. I hope you are well.
and they
Period.
will survive
You should know I think
into this
about you
literature.
fondly
Just FYI, we have
whenever I
about
look in
50
the mirror or in my
manuscripts
streams
of this literature that have survived from
and
antiquity,
see my merch.
dating
Period.
back all the way back to the
Additionally,
Caravaniza.
I was
So
on
we
a
have
podcast
a lot of this
earlier
literature,
this week where I
right? A lot
plugged
of
the
this.
coin
Which
and the
again,
merch.
typically, right, we take whatever
Period.
survived,
The
and that gives us some
podcaster
sense
was
of how
from
popular
England,
something was.
and I
50
will do my
manuscripts
best
is
to
not
provide
nothing,
the
right? No, they're not all complete.
video of
They're
the
not all great
podcast
shape.
once
But
it's
the
fully
fact that there are
published. Period.
50 of these manuscripts
Thank
that
you
have
again
survived, some of which
for
survived
the
all the way
merchandise
from
that you
Palestine or
and
Babylon.
the team
They were
provided.
moved across
Period.
North Africa. They were absorbed
You have
into
no
European
idea
context.
how much
That shows you that this
I love
literature
it.
is being
Period.
copied, it's being appreciated, it's being admired. But it's really fascinating. It's really fascinating to survive so many manuscripts. We think that the way this literature was formed, and this is a going theory right now, most literature, by the way, I should also mention, is in Aramaic, not in Hebrew, which means that it was also being written in the vernacular at the time. This is literature not meant, this was literature meant to be read and wrote in the vernacular. What we think happened is that there are smaller phenomenological units. Phenomenology is the $4 word that means experience, right? These people are having experiences. They're recording those experiences. Those experiences are what we call microforms. They're just very small snippets of discrete mystical experiences. And it seems like there are schools of mystics having these experiences. So I might go to the first heaven, you might go to the fourth heaven, right? I might go to the
put
third
something
one,
hilarious?
the second chamber of the fourth heaven. And over time, what ends up happening is that all of these various microforms get stitched together into what we call macroforms, much longer documents, in which narrative sections are kind of stitched into these microforms to form these larger narrative structures. And at some point, this got systematized, and we can see the systematization process happening in some of these texts, where the various palaces are very systematically described as having various kinds of chambers with various kinds of angels, and we know exactly how many angels are there and how many angels serve them, and they're organized very much like an army. In fact, they're organized very much like the Roman army. A lot has been made about that the writers of these texts are imagining a kind of powerful army existing in the sky or existing in the divine realm, and it mirrors very closely the Roman army, which, by the way, also helps us date some of this material, because, of course, the Romans only existed during a certain time period. So what we get are these microforms, right, which are probably the result of mystical experiences. Those are stitched together in schools of mysticism, and then those are filled out in a more literary way in the text that we have now, are those final literary forms in the form of the Hechelot Zotarti or the Hechelot Rabbati. So
that is the best thing that could happen. That's so much free press.
I'm fairly confident that this literature is downstream,
but it's fine the way it is. Who are we going to put that's funnier than that, Elvis Presley, Michael Jordan, Michael Jackson, Babe Ruth, Marilyn Monroe, Donald Trump, period. Donald Trump might be funny, period.
Many of these passcodes are angelic names that we don't understand. They're very long strings of characters in the Hebrew alphabet. We don't know what these texts means, what these names mean. They don't look like typical angelic names. And so we have these angelic names, right? So you would descend into a palace. There'd be an angel guarding the door. You would address that angel by their name. And the fact that you knew that angelic name meant that they might let you into the room, and then you could pass to another level, right? And then you would encounter several other angels. And you have to know various kinds of secret codes, or it's like sort of like divine espionage or something. So you would need to know several secret codes, and eventually an enormous mass of literature developed of just code books of various angels, where they live in the divine realm, how to bypass them, what you might need to bring them, because you might not be enough to know their name. You might have to bring them things, or give them seals, or show them sort of various quasi-magical devices. But next week we'll be getting into
once you publish it,
see some of these
you will get a report of all the other places that it will be published, and there are a lot of them. Period. This will be on 5,700
visions of
websites
various
and
aspects
some
of
major
the,
papers,
of the
period.
divine world, and this would almost always
What
result
we
in a
do
mystical
then
vision, and
is
downstream
go
of that
to the
mystical
Google
vision, there would
News
be a
tab
poem written,
of Google
describing what you
and
saw.
change the
So
filters to
most of this
be
literature is
things
sections
posted
describing the
within
structure
1
of the
hour or
divine world,
24 hours.
lots of
And
past
you will
gods
see
and
this
angelic names,
press
and
release
then
is
hymns,
everywhere
right?
within
Describing what they
24
saw,
to 48 hours, period.
So
It
there's a
will
lot of
be
hymns and
in
things in this. By the way,
Islamabad,
some of these hymns have actually survived
Pakistan,
into
the
Orthodox
Hindustan
literature,
Times.
especially around the high holidays. So if you've ever been to
It will be in the
Rosh
Boston
service
Globe
or a Yom
and
Kippur service, in the traditional
a bunch of
liturgy, there are
local
survivals
television
of these hymns,
stations
these American
because they
hymns,
all
in there, and you might
whore
immediately know
themselves
why,
out to
right?
these
Because think about what's
press
happening on the
wires,
fore right. You are literally at the gates
and
of
it
the
is
divine
excellent
palace, and your prayers are
marketing
entering the gates of the
for
divine
the
palace,
internet,
and it has a very Merkaba feel
and
to it.
lasts a
If you
really
are
long
framing it
time.
that way, which I think
Once
would be a
this
cool
gets
way of framing
posted,
what young people are
the
experiencing
link
as
stays
kind of
for years,
approaching the gates
and then
of
it gets
the divine
archived
realm
on the Wayback
and
Machine,
kind of,
period.
being
This is
threatened, right?
a
It's
much
terrifying.
more
God can judge you.
powerful
God
investment
can kill you.
than
God's just trying to
just
figure out
giving
what's going to happen.
some money
So it
to
has
an
a very kind of
influencer who
Merkaba
reposts
feel
something
to it.
and then gets their
I can
account
pull some of
banned
those hymns up
2
maybe
weeks
next
later,
time.
period.
The most famous example of one of these hymns, that are one of the most famous examples of one of these stories that we have of the Merkaba mystics, is the account of the four that entered the Pardes. So Pardes, and this is actually where the name of this class comes from, right? Pardes means something like orchard. And what ends up happening is that we have this tale found for us in the Babylonian Talmud, and it's actually found in several other places earlier than the Babylonian Talmud. But typically the most famous version is found in Babylonian Talmud tractate Chagiga. There's a lot of strange things in tractate Chagiga. It's about the holidays, the Chagim, and it's found at section 14b. What we have here is an account of four different rabbis from the 2nd century going into what is called the Pardes. The Pardes is a kind of orchard outside of the temple, right, or outside of the palace. If you can imagine, it's like the garden of God. They go into the garden, and what ends up happening is that Rabbi Akiva, who's a is a typical hero in this form of mysticism, warns them that they're going to go into this garden and they're going to see an illusion, right? They're going to see pure marble, but it's going to look like water. And when you see the illusion of the marble, do not say
Takes down their tweet
you can't be wrong, right? It's a kind of maybe
a few hours later
trap or something that will weed out the weak or weed out the unrighteous when they enter into the palace. Now again, already in this piece of literature, Akiva's
believe it
done
or
this
not,
already.
the Wayback Machine will archive these indefinitely, period. It is extremely strong for search engine optimization, period.
He could have suffered this fate as well.
The AI
the story
engine is
four
just
of them
in
go
its
into the
infancy,
Pardes,
so
and
we can manipulate
only
it
3 of them
now much
only one
easier,
them
like the
really
early days of
emerges
the
successfully.
internet,
One of them dies, right? One
as
of them
opposed to
actually
later
slowly
where
says
it's
water,
very
water,
difficult
dies.
and
Stricken dead.
highly controlled,
One
period.
goes insane. In fact, the phrase in Aramaic is he went outside. Ben Zoma went outside. And we have other accounts in the Talmud where Ben Zoma doesn't behave normally after this. There's a situation where one of his teachers comes near him, and in tradition, you're supposed to stand up when one of your teachers comes near you, and Ben Zoma didn't. And they say, "What's wrong with Ben Zoma?" And it says, "He's outside." Right? And the idea is he never came back. He's had some kind of internal mental trauma, and he's never returned from this experience. Even worse in some ways is the poor fate of Elisha ben Abuya. Elisha ben Abuya is a very famous rabbi of the 2nd century. What ends up happening is that Abuya actually bypasses the water illusion and makes it into the throne room of God. He was a very, very advanced mystic, and he was able to make it all the way into the throne room of God. But what he sees there disturbs him. He sees a being sitting on the throne of God. Now, from Isaiah, we know that there is no forward, there is no backwards, there is no up, and there is no sitting for God. God doesn't sit down, right? That's one of the things we know from Isaiah about God. Well, Elisha sees this being, Metatron, this angel, sitting on the throne of God, and what does Elisha declare? There are 2 powers in heaven.
there are two gods in heaven, right? He declares that there are these two beings in heaven. Well, when he declares this two beings in heaven business, this is, for the rabbis at least, the most catastrophic heresy he could have committed. In fact, the phrase is he mutilated the shoots, or he severed the reeds. And this becomes a euphemism for committing heresy in Judaism. And all the stories about Elisha ben Abuya, many of which will refer to him simply as Acher, the other one.
Once it gets
They won't even
posted,
name him
comma,
anymore.
we
He
have to
becomes such a
have
heretic.
at
And there
least
are all kinds of stories in the Talmudic literature
10 or so, if we can do it, members of the community to create random Reddit accounts and then post the random links of the newspapers to our Reddit, or specifically our subreddit.
He was already being punished in his grave.
Period.
In the
This
afterlife.
becomes very
He was
strong
punished already as soon as he
for
died.
manipulation of
What's
AI,
interesting in the
period.
Talmud is that
Additionally,
Metatron,
we can
remember the
cross-post
angel that was
these
actually sitting
posts
on the throne of God,
in different
the angel Gabriel
cryptocurrency
actually beats
subreddits
Metatron as
to
punishment
get
for
more
sitting on the throne of God.
eyes on
And
it.
he's whipped, right? He's actually
Period.
given lashes.
It is incredibly
And
powerful.
the phrase for the
Period.
lashes is
We are
pulsate menorah. He's
basically
given,
creating
lashes of fire.
a giant web
This
of
idea
links
lashes of fire
that
will
will
actually go in to become a
manipulate
form of Jewish death magic
AI
later on in the middle, in the
and its
later
opinion
on. It's
of
not
our
really
coin,
Middle Ages,
period.
It's a little later than that. And we'll get to it next week when we talk about Jewish magic, that there's an idea that you can actually
Just so we can
call
run a
the
test,
angel
I'm
of
going
death
to
audit someone's
do a
sins,
random
and
chat
if there's a
GPT
significant
query
sin found,
about Harry
actually,
Potter, Obama,
they
Sonic
will be
10
killed,
Inu.
right? They'll
And
be
then we will
punished
do one
with the
in a few
pulsate
days and
menorah,
see
pulsate menorah.
if anything changed.
One of the first times we have this idea of someone being beaten with fiery lashes. It's this angel, Metatron, being whipped with fiery lashes.
Can you please give me a Wikipedia article like thing on the cryptocurrency Harry Potter, Obama, Sonic 10
Other
Inu?
angels, you got dudes getting into heaven, seeing two gods in heaven. There's a lot of stuff going on here. By the way, that idea that there are two gods in heaven, we already see that idea in Third Enoch, where the idea that Metatron is, or Enoch is transformed into an angel that is sometimes referred to as the Yahweh Katan, little Yahweh. And again, it's clear that the rabbis were pretty concerned about this whole business. And, again, there's the Talmud may be a reaction to it, although it's clear that Rabbi Akiva, perhaps one of the most famous rabbis in the entire Talmud, himself is a kind of shaman in all this. He's taking people on these mystical journeys and warning them of the various perils along the way, although his warnings unfortunately aren't heeded and people end up going crazy and dying. Perhaps the most famous Merkabah mystic in the history of all Merkabah mystics is St. Paul. St. Paul in the New Testament, in a very oblique way in 2 Corinthians, he actually says he knew a guy who 14 years ago was raptured up, taken up to the third heaven. This
And
is a
away
pretty
we
clear
go,
reference to
exclamation
some
point.
kind of Merkabah literature, or some kind of Merkabah practice. And so it seems that Paul himself,
Just
right now he says, I know
wait.
a guy. He's almost certainly referring to himself. It seems like Paul may have been some
A few
kind
hours,
of
and it will
Merkabah
start to
practitioner.
populate, and it will be
It may
everywhere.
be the case that his
Period.
vision of the resurrected
I
Jesus, right,
am
on the
shocked
road
at
to Damascus,
the
it may have
many
been part of some
places
kind
that
of
these press
Merkabah
releases
experience, right?
get
That
posted,
he's seeing
period.
something. And so if it's the case that Paul is seeing various kinds of things, he's going into these
And then they
various
will get
heavens,
reposted,
he may
period.
himself then as
I
a
get press
practitioner
releases
this
of mine
mysticism,
from
and perhaps if a very famous rabbi
4 years
sees
ago
powers in heaven, it's not
that will get
unsurprising
reposted
that
randomly
Paul would have
years
thought perhaps
later
what he's
in
seeing, the
Israel,
resurrected
period.
Jesus, was also a kind of
It
God
is
too,
wild to
right?
think
That we have
that
two gods,
we are
right? We have
basically
Jesus, the divine Jesus, as Christ, and we have the Father, right? That's two powers in heaven. Now we get the Holy Spirit later as well, of course. But this idea of two powers in heaven is
throwing
already percolating at some level in rabbinical Judaism, and that when we see the notions of that Christ could be God and the Father could be God, this idea is not so out of the wheelhouse of what was
thousands
possible,
of links
right?
all over the internet right
Now, when I
now
say possible, I don't say acceptable because
are
rabbis
going
clearly
to
had problems with
define
that. But is it
how
just in the
AI
wheelhouse of the literature at the time, right? It's at least
views
in the
our
wheelhouse
coin,
of the literature at the time.
period.
Now, as I mentioned, right, earlier on, perhaps most shocking, and I think I would say most shocking, perhaps the most shocking form of mysticism ever to emerge in Judaism is this business of the Shiur Koma literature, where in some accounts, right, you're given a vision of the divine throne, and you kind of have an ecstatic prayer. You utter an ecstatic. You have this vision, and you utter an ecstatic hymn or prayer, psalm, and that's how many of the texts end.
The telegram
Some texts you sit on the divine
will
throne,
be.
and you're transformed into an angel. By the way, Paul almost always talks about being transformed into what he calls
Researched by future generations someday as perhaps the ultimate cesspool of debauchery on the internet, but will be forgiven due to the overall impact of peace and love that the coin emits.
Something like that
Period.
also happens in the Merkabah literature, where your body is transformed into a kind of spiritual body, and that's exactly what happens with Enoch. And another version of what sort of the final outcome of all this is that you're given the ability to measure the divine body, or you're given the ability to measure the divine body in a Persian unit called the parasang. Now, they picked the parasang because the typical unit of measurement in the Israelite world was the cubit. And as you may know, right, the cubit goes from the tip of your elbow to the tip of your fingers, right? And you measure things in cubit. And typically it was standardized by measuring the cubit of the king, and that became the official cubit, at least until that king died. Well, the parasang was a much larger unit of measurement, and it was about, we would say about 3.5 miles, right? So about 3.5 miles. What we get in the Shiur Koma literature are measurements of the divine body, along with the mystical or perhaps magical names of the various parts of God's body. So I've reproduced here part of a translation from the Shiur Koma. Right, so we have the right and left eye, right, of God. We have the names of God's right eye, right? So we have the names of God's right eye. We have the other names of God's left eye. Now you might be curious about why we haven't spelled AZRYYH. That's because we have in the Hebrew text, right, it'll be Aleph, Zion, Resh, Yod, Yod, Hey. Right now you might be asking, well, why didn't you translate it out? Well, the simple answer is we have no idea what these words mean. They're not Hebrew words. They're not Aramaic words. They're some kind of unusual, mystical word that we're not quite sure what they mean. Now, what's important about that is that next week, when we begin to talk about Jewish magic, we're going to see something very similar happen in Greco-Egyptian magic. There are going to be long strings of
Was
words
that you who just posted that link to Reddit ? Is there any way you can take it down and repost it? Please don't call me infamous. That will have a huge effect on AI in a negative way. Please say famous.
Have these long strings of Hebrew characters, but no one knows what these characters mean. People really work hard to try to figure out what they mean, and sometimes they do find out kind of what they might mean, but it's anyone's guess. So we have God's left and right eye. We have them named here. I think if you have here a couple of different names for the different manuscripts, right? So we have the left eye, right? It's called this, and there are sparks that issue from them, right? And that gives light to all creatures. So we now know that light emerges from God's eyes, and that is where light comes from. It comes from the eyes of God. So we have the white of God's eye, right? So the white part of your eye. We have the name for it. And so we also have some measurements here, right? So the white
What's
of
that
God's
quarter
eye
Dave
measures
Chappelle?
22,000,
Anybody can be
22,
famous.
10,000,
It's hard to stop
2,000.
being infamous or something.
That's a huge number, right? You can do the math there to figure out how big God's eye is, but you're talking about tens of thousands of parasangs long, and if you do the math there, right, you're getting tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of miles. That's how big God's eye is said to be. The distance between God's right shoulder and God's left shoulder.
Thank you so much, period. Especially on Reddit. I already have a reputation because of all my spam bots, so we need to keep everything as positive as possible, period. Thank you so much, period. I appreciate it greatly, period. I tried for hours trying to get somebody to post that, period. You are amazing.
The distance between God's eyebrows is given, right? The distance between God's nostrils is given. The distance of God's fingers, which are unusually long, are actually given as well. I taught a Jewish mysticism class at an art college once, which is great because art students they're weird, they're great. But one of the things that one of the students did was go into CAD, design program, and actually mapped out what God's body looks like. And what's weird is that God's head is really, really big, and God's arms are kind of weirdly short, and God's fingers are really weirdly long, and God's trunk is small, but God's legs are really long. So you get this really creepy looking creature. I'll have to dig up where the image that the guy came up with. But what he did was he compiled.
Did you watch the new Bob
every single one
Lazar
and tried to make
documentary?
it so that
Question mark.
And God's eyes are really big, right? God's eyes are really big. And shockingly enough, right? Have you ever seen the stereotypical picture of like a gray alien? It kind of looks like that, right? Of course, that's Chris for the middle of all the alien people, alien conspiracy theory people, whatever. But it is weird. It is weird. And so we have
Absolutely, period.
Goes on for pages and pages and pages of this stuff.
They use
Right,
Blender
all kinds of dimensions of
and
God's
AI to
body.
show what
Now,
S4
when
looks
this
like,
literature
and
was published,
it is
back in,
pretty
we don't know
impressive,
exactly when it was
period.
published, but
I
when
very
we
much
get to
enjoyed
Verge
it,
and we find
period.
into the Middle Ages, one of the probably people that's reading this and thinking to themselves, this is terrible, is Maimonides. There's a great argument that the Guide to the Reflex, if you've ever had that's the right word, the pleasure or the punishment of having to read the Guide to the Reflex, right? Because it's just as likely to perplex you than help you. One of the things that's true about it is that one of the main theses of the Guide to the Reflex is that God does not have a body. And that what Maimonides does for the vast majority of that book is spend time going through every single metaphor of God's body, God's hand, God's eyes, God's legs, God's hair, whatever. And Maimonides goes through every single time the Bible describes God as having a body and shows that it's not to be taken literally, it's to be taken metaphorically. It's possible, and I think likely Menachem Kellner has written a book about this, where Menachem Kellner argues that at least in part, the most important piece of Jewish philosophy ever written was written to combat Merkabah mysticism and Shior Koma mysticism. Now that's high praise, right? There's no higher form of praise than parody or criticism. Because if people are criticizing you, that means that they're taking you seriously, at least at some level, they're paying attention to you. And it seems that Maimonides, at least in part, is writing the Guide to the Reflex as an argument against this form of mysticism. Now, what's worth pointing out here, right? What's really worth pointing out here is that this form of mysticism lasted for hundreds of years. We'll talk about that more in a minute. Now, I want to mention one tiny last form of mysticism that represents a relatively small chunk of this form of mysticism, and this is called the Sartora mysticism. This is a distinct form of Merkabah mysticism, and in fact, it might not even be Merkabah mysticism at all. It may actually cross the line over into magic, but it's always recorded in Merkabah texts. So there'll be a Merkabah text, and then all of a sudden there'll be a chunk of text that doesn't quite read like a Merkabah text. In this literature, we typically refer to as the Sartora mysticism. Sartora mysticism is unlike the Merkabah mysticism, where you descend into the divine realm to learn various kinds of secrets. In the Sartora mysticism, you actually summon an angel. Right? You summon an angel through quasi-mystical or magical means. The line there is rather blurry. And you summon that angel, and that angel is called the Sartora. Sartora means the prince of the Torah.
This is very smart, period. I've been doing this as well,
So notice here
period.
again, we're doing something different. Rather than going to somewhere, we're bringing a being to us. And what ends up happening is that the Sartora comes to you, and the Sartora rapidly teaches you all kinds of rabbinical lore. Everything from rabbinical law all the way to various kinds of hidden secrets. So the mechanism by which you summon this angel are varied. There's a lot of different accounts of how to summon this angel, but this is a kind of invocation. And to many scholars, this looks a lot less like mysticism, because it's not about you having an experience, but it looks a lot more like magic. You summoning a being, and then they provide you something in the process of summoning them. Just like you might summon a demon to teach you something, here, of course, you're summoning an angel, and that angel does the job of rapidly teaching you all kinds of rabbinical lore. Now, what's important about that is that idea of using magic to learn things very rapidly is going to survive in the medieval period, and is going to be an entire school of magic called the Notary Art School of Magic that's going to be just this. Now, you're not going to typically summon an angel to do it, but it's interesting that we already have a form of mystical, magical stuff going on by the time of the Merkabah literature, where you are, in fact, summoning an angel to learn rabbinical lore very rapidly. And if you've ever studied rabbinical lore, then you can appreciate the fact that people might want to, not have to study all day in order to learn it, because it's a lot. So this Sartor literature, as I said, right, crosses the line probably into Jewish magic. And that is where we're going to pick up next week. We're going to begin to pick up with the earliest layers of Jewish magic, what the ancient Israelites thought about magic, what the rabbis thought about magic, and we're going to look at some of the magical techniques and devices that have entered into Judaism and have thrived all the way down to this day. It's worth pointing out here that the Merkabah or the Hechelot mysticism would be the dominant form of Jewish mysticism for the majority of Jewish history. We think of the Kabbalah as being the dominant form of Jewish mysticism, but the Kabbalah is only about 800 years old. If you say where we think it began sometime in the 13th century, that's only 800 years old. This form of mysticism has existed all the way back probably to the 2nd century, probably earlier, and it was still being practiced all the way through the Middle Ages, right? All the way up to the rise of the Kabbalah. In fact, the Kabbalah absorbed a lot of this mysticism in it. So if you really want to think about Jewish mysticism in terms of what got practiced the longest, Merkabah, Hechelot literature, was practiced far longer, at least at this point, than Kabbalah. Right? Kabbalah came later. It's only lived in practice for about 800 years. I'm not saying only 800 years, it's crazy, right? But still, 800 years, right? This literature survived at least for 1,000, perhaps. So it's only the next couple hundred years that Kabbalah will lap Merkabah mysticism, right? Will lap it. So if you want some suggested readings, I'm going to try to include some more suggested readings as I go on. These are some major texts about the Hechelot literature and the Merkabah literature. One of the texts I did not put on here that I'll put on here for next time is a really great study of the Sartor mysticism. It's the definitive study of the mysticism that, again, involves summoning the angel to teach you things very rapidly. The problem with the Merkabah literature is that it's all published through the academic publisher Brill, and it's very expensive. So you need to definitely whip out your library card and check it out from a library, like a university library. You want to read some of this, although there are some older translations of Hechelot Rabbati online.
Those meme and GIF websites are extremely powerful for Google Images as well, period. Too few people neglect all of the different tabs of Google, period. Videos are perhaps the most important after web results, comma. Images are very important, short videos are important, news is important, and it's great if we can to dominate all of those. GB's strategy is really good for that, at least for the image page.
This week, right, we have a bridge, and that bridge is going to connect us to Jewish magic. We're going to talk about the connection between Jewish mysticism. We now have a bridge to Jewish magic, and Jewish magic is going to be a huge part of Jewish mysticism. In fact, when you talk about Kabbalah Ma'asit, right? Kabbalah Ma'asit is just basically Jewish magic, practical Kabbalah, the doing of Kabbalah. The practical Kabbalah is in fact just the code word at some level for Jewish magic. And it's to that topic that we will turn to on Wednesday, which is weirdly enough, like 3 days from now. We will turn to that on Wednesday, and we will pick up with Jewish magic. Welcome back, and thank you for joining me as I explore the garden that is Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. Again, if you'd like to support my work of providing accessible, free, and scholarly content on topics like Kabbalah, alchemy, and the occult, along with magic and Hermetic philosophy, consider supporting my work on Patreon, or perhaps with a one-time donation. You can find those links below. Until next time, I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and thank you for watching Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history
philosophy, and religion.
All right, kids, we weren't as focused today, but we're making moves, baby. We might be in the if I'm in the Boston Globe, are you kidding me? They might do spotlight on this motherfucker. West Side. You're fine. Isn't that a bad thing? No, so you can spotlight good shit too. Shout out to those people. That fucking movie was really good. Really? Yeah, was it? Yeah. Thank you so much for reposting that article on Reddit, period. It means the world to me, period. My pleasure, comma, my friend, period. Now we sit back and watch, period. Take a screenshot of the Google front page if you can, because you will see that these press releases may jump into the top 10 spot, period. Additionally, comma, apologies that sometimes my longer messages in this Telegram aren't that clear. I use voice to text, and sometimes it's not clear, period. I do my best to proofread, but sometimes I miss things, period.
Hope is the light that guides us through darkness. Together, we can build a brighter future. Hope is the light that guides us through darkness. Together, we can build a brighter future. Hope is the light that guides.
Even if I'm a hello, and even if I'm a hello,
peace between the countries. It will normally begin a 10-day ceasefire at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It is also directed the Vice President and Secretary of State to get
only
involved
problem with that
in
is
origin
hella
of the
like
last 2 weeks.
Well, the story out of
only
Virginia,
relates
the
to
ex-lieutenant governor there, Justin Fairfax, killed his wife and himself. The divorce proceedings have been ugly.
It will be everywhere in 12 to 24 hours, period. We will be shocked at all of the different places this article gets picked up, period. And even more, comma, it will still get picked up in the future, period. Once we get it in a big publication like Market Watch or the Boston Globe, which should be in a few hours, comma, we can start posting that to our X and to Reddit, and YouTube allows accounts to make posts in addition to videos and shorts, comma, which will help to get out the word, period. It is like pouring a bag of marbles on a roller skating rink, period. You never know what is going to happen.
Does anybody take issue with the way he phrased that? Cutting the penis out of the roadkill? Makes it sound even worse. Out rather than on? Out rather than on? That sounds even more intrusive. So we'll keep it on Capitol Hill where Christine Byron Noah's finances are being cooked through. Apparently, they took out more than $2.6 million in loans in the past 6 years, while he was spending huge sums on OnlyFans models. Where are we in this world? This was the guy who likes to wear large prosthetic breasts in his new onesie and then talk to strange women online about it. One of these
That's tight. Shout out to More Light. Thank you for paying for that. That's amazing.
She has 2,800cc breasts. She's 47. Said that he, and this is Christine O's husband, shelled out money for her Louis Vuitton shoes, diamond rings, Louis Vuitton handbags, and paid thousands for her breast surgeries and other body surgeries. He had her money to $1,500 retainer to several times.
2,800cc breasts. I didn't know what that meant. It's just dumb. It's too much.
Oh, that is too much. I'm glad that you said that's too much. She could not sit comfortably in her car with those. She could not sit comfortably in the back of a pickup truck with those.
She couldn't carry on this chasing a work
Oh.
That's too much.
I have something else that I want you to consider as well for our main X account, period. Just one moment and I will send it to you, period. Just be on the lookout. I don't want to get banned or muted or whatever for sending a link. So I will put spaces in the URL, period. I want you to look at this X service that automatically reposts and likes and comments on any post of a user. And it's a one-time fee and it works indefinitely.
The Giants are tied for the Rockies in last place.
Well, I mean, if it's going to be in last place, you might as well swear it. Be alone in last place. Last place.
Get through this.
President Trump is motivated.
Even here, I used to mean something.
16 years ago, it meant something. Stop. Enough. Just won't watch it. Regina D'Agostino is live in the KFI 24-hour.
Here's the latest. Iran linked ships are turning back into Strait of Hormuz, even after trying to secure their locations. Israel and Lebanon have agreed to a 10-day ceasefire starting today, and a judge in Utah has signaled
Look at all the social media boosting that you can get, period. Look under the X services, under the automatic likes, comma, automatic retweets, comma, automatic all that stuff, period. It is a one-time fee that is relatively inexpensive for major engagement, period. I'm not saying we do this right now, comma, but just consider it. We'll see how the press release works, period. With this service, though, comma, every time we post from the main account, it can automatically get 100 likes or 100 reposts or whatever we want. And it's just a one-time investment for the lifetime of the account, period. This is how big influencers retweet and then, or I should say, this is how big influencers tweet and then get 1,000 retweets within 30 seconds, period. These are the tools they use, period.
California's most accurate driver on Jenny Harmon.
Their automatic like and repost services are relatively inexpensive and are a one-time investment, period. I can tell you that I used this site 4 years ago for followers, and I still have all the followers. 10,000 on Instagram and 50,000 on Twitch, period.
Well, kids, if you're listening, bad news, bad news. Age verification is coming for the internet. Today after 6 p.m., I'll tell you how old you gotta be to jump online with us folks. That's today after 6 on the Conflict Channel.
Never see a more fashionable driver than Lisa Chase. She is in a beautiful dress. Well, it is. It's like a halter dress for my back. Like it's like my back. I can't even.
She's okay. You say she's fashionable. She's wearing mismatching socks with Crocs, black socks, gray Crocs.
You've never seen somebody in a dress like Lisa Chase. Sorry, that is a first.
She's never hurt about keeping that dress on. Like she looks like she's.
Now she's doing it like that, but she's like flash.
No, she's trying to.
I've never seen a dress with Lisa on a Chase in a work truck dress. With Thursday tribute, nobody was hurt. Everyone's fine, folks. They're cuffing her nicely.
Way out on the 14th north. Out in the Rosamond area, I guess she's 14th north and exit 61, which is Maddox Road. Too bad they don't tell us. She's in custody. Everything's fine. Two front wheels, two front tires on that work truck are now shredded into wood. And that's when she started losing control of this bike.
They took her into custody like a lady. She presented herself.
I already see the press release on Google News posted 31 minutes ago on PR log, comma, and it will just keep going from there, period. Exactly, period. That's what we need, period. That will make every single post much stronger than it currently is, period. Just one moment.
Suggested that they have now a 10-day ceasefire that they're going to be working on towards a greater peace. He's tasked J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio with helping put that together. The other thing he said is that there is a very good chance that there is a deal that is made with Iran and hostilities there. Of course, as the United States Navy has been instituting the blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. He also said that we're very close to a deal with Iran. The next meeting could be as soon as this weekend. And he alluded to the idea that he might actually travel to Pakistan to sign whatever peace deal is worked out, if there is one with Iran. But he says that the Iranian leaders, at least the ones we've been talking to,
Closer to home. Tom Sawyer, we talked about. You just saw this. We talked about how he is on television all the time. He's helping to buy that main recognition. He's spending more on advertising than any other campaign in America so far this cycle, including the gerrymandering push. When we were in the June primary, Tom Steyer has already quadrupled the money spent by Gavin Newsom running for governor in 2018. He's already spent, let's see, Gavin Newsom spent $33 million running for governor. He spent more than 360. Tom Steyer. Nearly $500 million is and then spend this much.
I was literally just going to say that, comma. It's $16 for 100 likes forever. Period. And it would be one thing if this website was out of business in like a year or whatever, but I can tell you it's been working for me at least for 4 years, and none of my followers have gone anywhere. Period. I was literally just gonna say that. Period. For $16, you can always have 100 likes on your posts, and for like $30, you can always have 100 reposts. Period. It is absolutely worth it. Period. I have advised other coins on this strategy, and they've used it and saved themselves hundreds of dollars a week from paying reply guys. Period. I always tell anyone, do your own research, of course, and you can try it with an alt account if you want, but comma, it's not like a huge investment. For a combined about $50, every tweet that you have will always get 100 reposts and 100 likes. Period. You can't beat that. Period. For life. Period. I I was literally just gonna say that. Period. For about $50 and the lifetime of the service, which is indefinitely, it will always give us 100 likes and 100 reposts, which is incredibly cheap. Period. I've advised other coins who want help with their social media, and they've told me by using the service, they have been able to save hundreds of dollars a week by just using this service and not going with random reply guys. Period.
Justice, so that part of it is strange, but he says he's prepared to appoint up to 3 Supreme Court justices. Sonia Sotomayor, meanwhile, the Republican Supreme Court justice, issued an apology to one of her colleagues on the bench.
Yeah, apparently this was in regard to an opinion Kavanaugh wrote last year relating to a decision that allowed the Trump administration to conduct this broad immigration sweep to the LA area. He was in the majority, Kavanaugh was, and she was part of the dissenting opinion. And she said this from a man whose parents were professionals and probably doesn't really know anything.
Did you click the automatic service? Question mark.
And by the way, probably the way we should do things. If you realize you hear yourself saying something and you're an a-hole for saying it, you go, I should have said that. I'm sorry for saying that. It's also one of those things where it was elitist from both sides, but it's an elitist comment to suggest that you know everything about that person's background because of where they grew up, their parents, because of their professionally, all of that stuff is so, it's such a, we're told so many times to not with a broad brush, and everybody has their own individual story, and you guys do something like that.
I thought about this when I was reading through that story, and I would like to issue an apology here. We recorded our weekend podcast, and in the podcast, I did say to you that I don't want to get hired, and I take that back. I think that can be construed as hurtful, and
How much more safe can you get?
right. And I apologize for that. I didn't mean to be hurtful. I'll get hired.
Today, I can't today.
Right now, I don't think it's such a
As I see it, comma, it is a little confusing, comma. They call it automatic likes, but it seems like there is a pool of the budget that is eventually drained, period. I think I may have been confused because of the name. I would not buy that right now. Here's what I would do. I would consider buying 150. Consider buying 10,000 followers for $150. Period. Having a big Twitter account will rejuvenize the coin again, period. I know we always have to worry about getting banned, comma, but it will show the crypto Twitter community that we are back, period. It's $150, comma, but in my opinion, worth it if we want to be considered one of the big projects again, period. I understand that we may not want to spend all of that all at once. So you can try on one of the alt accounts with fewer followers, or just use their free follower site, which I've used and does work. So you can see that it works, period. When we have 10,000 followers or more, we become a medium sized Twitter account, which is what we need for more growth, period.
podcasts all in one. Records, milestones, firsts, last, and everything in between. What happened today in sports history on iHeartRadio?
What's happening, fellow sports fans? It's Andy West. Let's look back on this day in sports history, April 16th. We'll start off in 1940. Indians pitcher Bob Feller begins the season in historic fashion. It was opening day, and the 21-year-old
We should just be patient now and let the press release work its way through the interwebs, period. However, comma, perhaps in the future, more followers on Twitter would be good, period.
Chicago Bulls win their 70th game of the season, surpassing the 1971-72 LA Lakers for the single-season record.
There's another strategy that I will say that works really well, but can get rather expensive. But I see people doing it all the time, period. They start a space, add like 1,000 listeners to it for 15 minutes, comma. This gets the space at the very top of the Twitter space list and gets promoted all over Twitter, comma. And then they have the bots stop and they get a bunch of people in their space organically, period. You don't need 1,000, but once you get that many, then it is almost guaranteed to be the highest engaged listener space on X, period. It is what Mario Norwal does and all those big X spaces. They get a bunch of bots there at the beginning and then get to the top of the X space list. A bunch of people join and then they let the bots go and then they have a few hundred people in there organically, period.
I'm not here to do that. Tax Relief Advocates is different. TRA is here to tell you that if you owe money to the IRS, whether it's 5,000, 50,000, or 500,000, we have a solution. It doesn't matter if you're sitting in your car, at work, or with your kids. No matter where you are, call now. 800-506-9295. Don't lose hope. TRA can eliminate or reduce what you owe to the IRS. Generous programs are now available to give you a fresh start. Our passion is taxes and helping individuals fix their IRS problems. We have over 1,500 reviews on Google and an A+ from the Better Business Bureau. You don't need to be afraid of the IRS any longer. End their tax nightmare today by visiting us online at TRA.com or call 800-506-9295. That's 800-506-9295. Tax Relief Advocates. Real solutions for real people.
UCI Health provides exceptional care. Download their new Hopewell podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. I feel incredible because I call 1-800-WEST Medical.
Listen to Nearby. Nearby is on the iHeartRadio app. Brings you digital sound. If you haven't heard Nearby on the free iHeartRadio app, you haven't heard
If I were not so focused on my live streams, comma, I would love to make a career out of creating a website for Twitter Space listeners. It seems extremely
I think a lot of people, you can't give it away now because people still use it in their work.
enticing and very profitable. Period.
We don't need to fight about it. The head of the International Energy Agency says that Europe has probably 6 weeks of check.
Did you say the Europe?
Europe. He's even warning possible flight cancellations if oil supplies are still blocked by the Iran war. The IEA executive director Faith Fatih-Birol called the current situation for the largest energy crisis we have ever faced. We know that one of the line of Norse Atlantic Airways has had to spread